You have to take a different angle than everybody else is and see what else is out there.
Hi, and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. Here you can hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, digital marketing dude Max Brandstetter. You can send me your fan mail or cries for podcast help at max@hippodirect.com. This is episode number 29, and today's guest is Taylor Ryan. He's a 5-time co-founder and CMO at Valuer in Copenhagen. Valuer uses AI to match startups with corporations for the sake of corporate innovation, and they were recently named the hottest new startup in Denmark by the Nordic Startup Awards. Hear Taylor's wild journey from Washington, D.C. to Copenhagen, the crazy tech things that they are up to in the startup world, and even his appearance on House Hunters International. And now, it's time. Skål! Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Taylor Ryan, the Chief Marketing Officer of Valuer over in Copenhagen, Denmark, one of the hottest startups in Denmark. How are you doing today, Taylor?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am fantastic. How is everything in sunny Copenhagen today?
Actually, it is sunny for the first time in about 2.5, 3 weeks.
There we go. It's just like Philadelphia.
Not far from it in terms of the weather, actually. So yeah. But things are good, man.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I'm very excited to connect. And Valuer, what you're working on now, it's a very, very cool startup. And separate from Valuer, you have a really, really interesting background yourself. So before we dive into everything, I would love if you could take a little bit to share with the audience a little bit about your personal background, sort of how you got into the business world, and what's the biggest thing you're up to today.
Sure. So I've been basically a co-founder of 5 previous startups, all kind of within my 20s.
That's it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Right. Well, it's one of those things. I had the luxury of graduating in 2008 at the height of the economic recession, which basically means you can't get a job. You kind of have to start your own thing. So, I mean, it was a grand spectrum of everything from home remodeling company, found manufacturers out in China to sell teeth whitening solutions to a bunch of different beauty salons and tanning salons up and down the East Coast.
Wow.
Mobile app development firm, which then spun off to our own mobile app. Terrible name, terrible idea, gluten-free VIP.
Hey, you know what? I think that's got a ring to it.
Well, you can't find it in the App Store anymore. So long story short, that thing didn't pan out.
Well, maybe you could find it at Whole Foods. So.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things, I tried my hand at everything. I think the most successful one that I had was a government contractor kind of gig that pulled together with an old business partner of mine. And we won a $4.3 million government contract. But all of this has been a learning experience and great opportunities. And I basically spent most of my life in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. You're an East Coast guy, so Arlington, Virginia basically was kind of my home base.
Oh, yeah. I haven't been to D.C. area in a while, but I am very familiar with it. And I've been in New York area for the past almost 5 years now. So it's a cool part to be in.
Now, and I do love that being in the DC area. Most New York guys are like, oh yeah, I don't go to DC. Why would I? I live in the center of the universe. So, so I kind of get where you're coming from because I probably wouldn't go either. So
yeah, speaking from the center of the universe, I completely agree. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go. Attaboy. I like it. But yeah, I'd been basically turning my wheels out there. I had just left a job and was trying to start another company with a business partner that I really didn't see eye to eye with. And at some point I kind of threw up my hands and I'm like, all right, let's do a drastic change and see where we're at. So that was 3 years ago. And I've been living in Denmark ever since. It's been crazy, stressful, fun, interesting, bizarre, and all things in between.
Wow. So how did you get to Denmark in the first place?
I had a buddy that was getting married out in London. And basically I studied abroad for a semester in college, and he had reached out to me 7 years later and was like, hey, I'm getting married, come to my wedding. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I had a buddy that was actually living in Copenhagen, and I took all of my vacation for the year, 2 weeks, which is crazy.
Right.
Out in the Nordics, the standard is 5 weeks. So
Right.
that's something to aim for at some point in life. I don't know.
Where did you study abroad?
I studied at the University of Leicester. So basically, they had three different options. One was Cambridge, one was Reading, which didn't really interest me, and the other one was, as they described it, kind of a towny kind of feel and out in the middle of nowhere. So not a lot of other international students. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that one.
Yeah, got to put yourself out there. That's very cool. I actually studied in London myself, so I get the itch to kind of get back to Europe and see it. So I see why you went over there.
Yeah, it's got some charms to it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a formative experience for anybody that's gone. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. And so you went there for a wedding, and what made you stay in Copenhagen after that? I mean, it must have been a hell of a wedding.
Yeah, right. Well, I had a buddy that was getting married in London, but I stopped by. It was peak summertime out in Copenhagen, and it's one of those things that I always tell my friends when they're visiting, as I'm kind of showing them the town. I'm like, look, if you don't like biking, beautiful cities, or beautiful women, Copenhagen's just not for you. It was
plus the food and beer too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wild environment when it comes down to finding out. Of course, I was explaining to people when I was there, I took all of my vacation for the year just to be here, and they're like, wait, what? Like it sounded so backwards to them. And
Right.
I was appalled finding out that these people had, obviously it was more than 2.5 times the amount of free time that I had. And by the way, the average work week is 37 hours. I mean, do the math. That's
like an average day in America.
Well, that's why I love it out here too, because I kind of work the regular days that I used to back in DC. So people are like, how do you do this? I don't understand. What's your secret? I'm like, I just stay at work.
Right.
There's not really a magic secret,
Yeah. You're the wizard of startups over there, and you're by staying a few extra hours. That's pretty cool. That's an interesting area, though. What other things have you noticed that have been sort of a bigger adjustment in being an American in Europe?
I think the longer you move away, even in the States, you lose a little bit of what home used to be, and you're just kind of more an eclectic mix of kind of the old and the new. So I don't know. I don't think I picked up an accent or anything, but
I don't think so. I'm sensing a strong Danish accent coming from you.
That would be fun. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's just you become a different version of yourself, but it's tough to really point out the stuff that has evolved so much over time.
When you say different version of yourself, what do you mean? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the concept is, I remember reading Ben Franklin when he had lived so many years in Paris and was able to relate so much with the Parisians and had such a different experience. And then he came back to the States and using the same metaphors, trying to explain experiences and also trying to relate to those that he had known prior to his leaving, it was very difficult. And so you kind of straddle this version of, hey, American cowboy or whatever they think I am. And then you go back and see old friends and family and try to explain without sounding like a total pompous douche that I'm really happy over here. Because as soon as you say something about studying abroad, at some point they're like, oh, douchebag, and it's
note to self for how often I talk about that. But anyway.
Well, I think there's so many memes out there. If you Google like meme and study abroad, I think you'll find some really hilarious stuff. But
yeah,
I think over time you evolve and you're kind of a creature of the things that you've encountered in the different areas that you've lived in. And I think my friendships have evolved. I think obviously with age, I've definitely come into my own in a lot of different ways. And yeah, I think also just being in a completely different continent, you're forced to be a lot more independent than maybe you would have back at home.
Yeah, that's so true. And looking at your professional background, I mean, you've co-founded 5 startups. You've been in a number of different industries, as you mentioned before. Shout out gluten-free VIP in China. But now in your current role at Valuer, you are the CMO. So not technically a co-founder, obviously a very important position though. What's the biggest change that you've seen, adjustment that you've experienced from going from a co-founder to an employee?
Well, it's tough. In order to stay in this country, I'd either have to get an entrepreneur visa, which is actually considerably harder than I first anticipated.
Really?
I mean, obviously, it's one of those things that they want to make it challenging, especially with something in the way of a refugee crisis. So it wasn't really on the table. And the idea was that I wanted to double down on some of the things that I was passionate about in terms of getting better at. So everything from SEO to marketing automation to more of the development of leadership skills. And one of the things that I really enjoyed when I met the founders of Valuer, and I mean, the company had, I think it was 5 or 6 people when I got here, and we're just shy of 100 now.
Oh, wow.
I mean, super fast growth, but it was one of those
Yeah.
things where they were like, look, we'll stay out of your way. So long as you're producing what you're claiming is possible, then, the sky's the limit and nobody's going to tell you how to do anything. And I'm like, all right, great, let's do this.
Yeah.
It's been great to be able to buckle down and just focus in on core areas rather than try to run the business, because I'm sure with your background as well, you can relate that you have to spin so many plates, keep so many balls in the air that you don't really
Right.
get to focus on getting good at anything at any given point.
Yeah. How'd you know I have a hobby of plate spinning?
Well, I assume with the podcast now.
Yeah, exactly. But all right, so let's dive into Valuer some more, because it's a very, very cool startup, really an amazing background. And as you just said, I said some explosive growth. So for anybody that's not familiar with the company, can you give sort of the little elevator pitch of what Valuer is and what you guys are doing and trying to achieve?
Sure. Let me give the small version, and then I can kind of bust out an analogy slash metaphor.
Perfect. Oh, I
So,
thought you were going to say bust out a freestyle rap.
no. So Valuer basically connects bright startups with large corporations. The concept is some of these larger organizations realize that they need to continue to innovate and evolve and change the different revenue models to be able to be relevant in 5, 10, 20 years. You're seeing a time span of the Fortune 500 companies that used to be the average was 33 years per company that would stay on there. It's dropped down to 14 because you have to stay relevant, because you can't rest on what worked yesterday. And a lot of these large organizations, they become slow moving. They become too proud, or they just say, hey, we're going to double down on what worked 5 years ago. And that's why you have examples like Toys R Us that used to be
Right.
the place that you knew of when you thought toys for kids, and now they're no more. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a market for it, and you have a lot of companies that are creating these innovation labs that are trying to either acquire startups or trying to build something in the way of collaborations with them. So we basically supply the startups to these corporations and give them the opportunity to start connecting with these people and building these relationships and foundations.
Basically are like the glue guys that connect these people that are, I guess there's some similarities and obviously some mutual beneficial services and products that they offer, but a lot of times the companies by nature are probably so different from each other.
I think that's the fun part. When we first got going, we really tried to narrow down a couple of different industries. So fintech is sexy, so is biotech, so is
It is
energy.
so sexy.
I mean, come
so
on.
so hot right now. Yeah.
So it is one of those things. I find those specific verticals to be really fun, and I mean, not to say that others aren't, but you see a lot more people throwing money hand over fist at fintech versus people that maybe are not so much for the next SaaS platform. And it really just
Yeah.
depends on the market. But if you look at like the Eastern markets, so like anything coming out of Korea or China or even some of India, it's a
Mhm.
lot of AI, it's a lot of biotech, it's a lot of med tech, and people are trying to corner that industry, and somebody's going to get it right. And the idea is, why not take venture capital from corporations and double down on that? Because those guys don't want to miss out on the next Facebook or the next Instagram or whatever. They're realizing that they already
Right.
are behind in this race and they want money too.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I see why you guys have gained so much steam. If you had to say one type of innovation or one industry that is in the highest demand by these larger corporations, what would you say?
Well, some of the large clients that we're working with right now are really into energy tech, and that kind of goes with the Nordics in terms of, yeah, I mean, everybody,
Yeah.
if you look up Denmark, I guarantee you'll see pictures of these newer windmills that are kind of all over the place on the shores. And I think that's because the power companies, it's crazy expensive out here. So it's not because it's sexy and cool, but it's because it's need based. They're trying to reduce the overhead and the cost of what they have to pay because they're still burning fossil fuels. So, some of our larger clients they're doubling down on what potentially will be a real opportunity in 5 years. And that's the way that you have to think about it. You're not going to win in the year to 3 year time span. It's further out. And I think startups have a lot of that understanding as well. And so it's changing this old school mindset of these. I mean, there's certain types of people that go into certain types of work. And
Right.
I mean, throughout college, I would always say, like, I'm never going to work in that environment, this large corporate faceless thing. And that's partially because I love the movie Office Space.
Classic.
Yeah, it's so sad.
Shout out Michael Bolton.
Yes, right. What song would you say was your favorite song? Oh, all of them.
I like them all.
Yeah. Well, and it's so sad because like all my interns never heard of that movie, and they're like, we were born in '93, and I'm
Right.
like, oh, awesome. So
Probably the typical Office now compared to when that movie came out is so different. So it's interesting.
yeah, very true. Yeah, no, great point actually.
Energy is an interesting industry in itself, and your portfolio of startups that you work with is all over the place, and you have tons. How do you reach out and find these different startups?
So there's a few different ways. I mean, if anybody has ever worked using any data scrapers, it's incredibly easy to pull information off of everywhere. So that's meetups across the world. That's a ton of different standard places, and I can't say which ones, that tend to list startups on the regular. It's very easy to get a hold of that data. And that's kind of setting like a bare minimum. I think the hard part is finding startups that haven't necessarily put the information out there because they're trying to stay under the radar or they're focused on building. Those are the ones that I find to be way more interesting. So we've managed to accumulate a large agent network. The concept is basically there's a ton of people worldwide that we've managed to work out deals with where they receive what we call missions. And we basically say, hey, we need a startup that's in adventure tech. And please find us a company that has not received a round A investment yet, but is prototype positive, meaning they have a prototype. And whatever you got, wherever it is, great. Or maybe it's specifically, we need somebody in Singapore or somebody that's willing to move to Singapore. So it really just, the results are pretty staggering. You'd be surprised. It's like crowdsourcing something in the way of searching for something that ordinarily isn't there. And you can't find these just using Crunchbase or Angel.co, and it doesn't exist. It's a really unique time to be going after this stuff. And I've always explained it as like replacing the startup analyst. Like it's such a douchebag role, but it's a job I wish I had. It's the greatest job ever. Like you get to go to like an event every week and you wine and dine people. And if you meet 10 people in a day, then like, way to go. And they pay you crazy amounts of money for it.
Oh yeah.
It's like $100,000 plus, like at a minimum. And my job is to replace that dude. Like the reality is it's a 1-for-1 contact. And maybe he's doing a little bit of searching himself and narrowing it down for herself. But the reality is it's still person to person. And I'd rather extend a network and either growth hack this opportunity or find a better way to reach into different areas that I never would have had access to.
Yeah, well, it's cool. It's almost like you have your army of ambassadors out there. And so you have people all over the world that are helping you with these different industries. So that's a great approach. And that is something that really you see it with so many different industries that really translates to any sort of company. I mean, even just thinking back to my
time in college, how many different brands had college ambassadors, that people talking about Spotify and, all these hot brands at the time.
Sure.
To spread the word and connect with people. And let's go back to the growth stat you said. I think you said you've increased from about 5 people when you started to a team of around 100 people now.
Right.
Right. So what can you point to as the biggest thing that has led to that growth?
I mean, it's tough to select just one thing. I think we've had a large space to grow into in terms of not a lot of competition. So that's been really nice to basically, it's not blue ocean, but nobody offers the same kind of tool set that we're doing right now in terms of using a bit of crowdsourcing mixed with what we deliver. So there's that. I think also we've been incredibly lucky to land a lot of clients very early, and even though elements of the product weren't absolutely finished yet, they had been more than understanding and basically said it's fine. Just keep delivering that element, and you owe us later, kind of stuff. And we're like, all right, yeah. So now that we're there, and we're able to deliver the stuff that we promised months ago, they're now giving us referrals. And so they're saying, hey, this worked for us. This is a non-competitor of a company that's 10,000 people plus. Use them too. It's this crazy kind of just runaway train that it has just kind of worked out on its own. And, it helps that we've been able to optimize a lot of the growth hacking and a lot of the marketing side, but we've also had a pretty diligent sales team in here as well. So, I mean, it's just firing on all cylinders and basically having also a location that allows us to have that many people, as well as some of the remote developers too. So it's really just, I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. And I've always wanted to be in this kind of environment. And God knows I've tried. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. It seems like you've put in a couple hours of work over the years. Yeah. But that's amazing. I mean, and you guys are living proof how important it is to get those early wins and sort of build off of that. And it sounds like you just have some amazing relationships with the clients and different startups that you work with.
Can you imagine getting a 100% open rate on your next marketing message? Well, you can with extra large postcards that are impossible to ignore. Hippo Direct can help you find the perfect list of proven direct mail responders. We can even help lay out and design the postcard for you. Check us out at hippodirect.com.
I want to dive some more into some more of the, I guess, the subject matter of what you guys are in and the space that you guys are in. So let's start with AI, which is artificial intelligence for those of us who love long words. And can you start with just sort of a beginner's definition to what AI is?
Yeah, so I love there's a joke that I've heard at 2 different conferences, and when the joke is done in front of developers, they all laugh. When it's in front of somebody who's not a developer, nobody gets it.
So I will not get this.
Yeah, right. I mean, the concept is very simple. AI exists in PowerPoint, and machine learning exists in Python. The idea is that AI as artificial intelligence, the theoretical concept of having an all-smart, all-knowing computer that speaks like IBM Watson, but actually thinks for itself, we're not there yet. And we're not going to be there for a little while. We have some time before the apocalypse and whatever is predicted by Elon Musk and everybody else.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have that situation inside of Valuer either. So what we do have is this machine learning tool that basically we're able to use about 80 different fields, and it's a mixture of qualitative and quantitative reasoning. So think of fields as like elements of a startup. So let's say one of the more important ones, the experience of a founder. So if I know that this founder has 1 previous exit or 2 previous exits under their belt versus 0, then they're rated significantly higher because they have a track record, a proven track record of results. So we basically do that across 80 different fields. Many of them are taking in long strings of data scraped off of their LinkedIn profile, as well as some of the other articles that we've written about them, as well as stuff that we found written in other places and referring domains and that type of stuff. Basically backlinks, but basically being able to show with some element of certainty based on all of the different fields weighted against each other, we can say with some level of certainty, and in certain industries, it's up to 85% certainty that this is an investable quantity that will show positive results, which is really hard to do.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's constantly growing. The more data that we feed into this thing, the more accurate we're getting. So the concept is basically that you're able to use a really advanced algorithm to predict investability for a startup. And that's super hard. It's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. And it's a lot of, and I have like my thesaurus out here because I'm defining everything as we're going along. But how long did it take your team to develop that algorithm that you use today? I mean, I can't imagine that was an overnight success.
No, and that's also why we started with the three industries that we did. It's because you really have to, if you know anything about Hadoop and R in terms of some of the programming languages, in terms of trying to create something in the way of stats on something, or trying to organize data in such a way that basically says, when this word occurs, mark this as a point upwards in this direction or a point downwards in that direction. It's incredibly thorough and incredibly difficult. And the idea is that you also need to be a bit of a linguist to understand this. And it starts getting really challenging if you start translating articles, trying to take a company from, let's say, Serbia and put them through our system, because there's so much less limited data, that there's not as much out there to be able to make something in the way of a certain determination on what exactly their business model is, as well as some of the stuff that's been written about them.
Right. So you're just fluent in like 700 languages then?
Not me, certainly not me, but most of the stuff that we are doing, luckily, is in English. So it's been nice.
Okay. That definitely makes it easier, but that's amazing. It's like, you're blowing my mind right now. It's just crazy how in depth this stuff is. And it's no pun intended, like a foreign language to the average person. That's for sure. In general, why do you think AI is so important to startups and companies going forward?
As people get better at collecting data, I think it's going to be significantly more clear. The idea is that you potentially can collect enough data in order to automate some of the choices that you need to make. So think of like the most simplistic version of this, like an Optimizely. Are you familiar with the Optimizely tool? It's an A/B testing tool.
I've heard of that. I have not used them firsthand, but I've heard the name.
Nice. Well, it's a really simple A/B testing tool that basically splits traffic and allows you to serve up two different versions of a page with a slight change. And if you see that more people click on the button when it's colored green as opposed to red, then okay, going forward, let's make sure the button is always green. So you have something there. The idea is that imagine doing this a million times over on a million different examples of a million different parts within your company. And all of a sudden you can start predicting things that were impossible 5 years ago. So that whatever department is on the second floor uses far more electricity, and what's going on with those guys. Or maybe it's something to the effect of, this particular person is going to quit in the next 3 months because they've used this type of language in emails, and we know that every time somebody uses this phrase, it gives them a tick mark higher to basically say, I don't like my job here and I'm going to quit in the next 3 to 6 months. And if this person is very valuable, you figure out how to save them from quitting, or you fire them on the spot because they're terrible and they're awful at their job, and screw that guy anyway. Nobody liked Dave to begin with. So,
wow. Well, that's like some Big Brother stuff right there.
It's true, but we're all getting there, and
right. No, it's fascinating.
That's HR AI tech. And I think that will take a lot of people by surprise in terms of what we're willing to give away and what we don't realize we're giving away in order to get more accurate and measurable and actionable results. And all that stuff's coming, man. It's coming from everywhere. And it's just, who's going to be building the first couple of different tools that allow us to be flexible enough to apply it to different things.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm wondering if, like, you'd think that's would cause this seismic shift in employees, where they're very conscious of the words that they put in their emails, and even more so. I mean, I know people are trending that way over time, but even more so, it's just going to make you think, like, there's just going to be more and more phrases that, if you don't want to cause conflict, if you don't want to create an issue, that you should just stay away from in your emails. Yeah,
or never use email again. But I mean, obviously that's not an option. It's tough, and you're getting to a point, I guess, and this is kind of this weird fallacy of, I don't want Google knowing where I am at all times, but I really need to find the shoe store before they close. So I need to use
Right.
the yes. It's a
Mhm.
trade-off, and in order to make sure that employees are getting the most delicious lunch meals that are the highest in let's say satisfaction, you also need to give away the part of you that potentially gets called into HR because like it's a trade-off. All
It
technology is a
is.
trade-off.
Yeah, it definitely is. And speaking of tech, before we move on to the next segment here, I do want to hit on some other things because I know when you speak and appear in podcasts and whatnot, there are a lot of different topics you cover, a lot of interesting ones. And even though it's a little different from I would like to take a little bit to dive into some other things, just sort of.
Yeah, I'm down, man.
So
Sure.
yeah, we'll cover 75 different topics here in a minute. No, but the first thing here is, and you mentioned this a couple times already on this podcast, the term scraping. And I know it can kind of tie to big data and how well you market. So can you define for our listeners what scraping is briefly?
Yeah. I had a laugh about this the other day with some of the other back end guys that are working on the marketing team. Shout out to Paul and Donatus.
There we go. Shout out Paul and Donatus.
Yo. So it's one of those things. If you're dumb enough to give me access to your event database, that basically is like a meeting planner thing in an event. We've all done these different events where basically you can search for people that are also going to the same event if it's a large enough event.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So most of those folks don't realize that if you're giving me first and last name and the company they work for and the job title, I can pair that data up with just about anything. So think of it like this. I can pair up the name of the company with the actual domain that it comes from. So that's using a tool called Clearbit. So now I have at the very least the first and last name, job title, and the company, and the actual domain of the company, the URL. So then I can find their email address. So at the very least, using a couple of very simple tools, I can basically scrape everybody's information. Maybe there's 25,000 people going to this event. And then I can reach out to them using sequenced emails, using anything from whether it's MailChimp or SendGrid, doesn't matter. I can send a sequence of emails saying, hey, so-and-so, I'm really excited to go to this event, found your information, hope you don't mind. I was actually trying to get in touch with specifically you. I'm going to the event. I'd love to catch up with you. Are you interested? Maybe we can grab a cup of coffee, send. And I do that basically with a follow-up and then one more. So the reality is I'll have about 10,000 to 15,000 people that have responded to me. And then I'll have somebody go through and prioritize which ones seem interesting. And hopefully I'll have a good, better, best scenario. And then I'll say, these are the top 50 people I'd like to meet. The rest of the people, I'll send out something saying, oh, wouldn't you believe it? I got full up on stuff already. But hey, while I have you, here's a link to my landing page, and I'll make sure that I can track that. And also, we should totally catch up on like LinkedIn sometime. We should connect. I'm sorry, I got so busy. And I've done this for events that I don't even go to. So,
Wow.
so the idea is that you build your network, but you also get them to actually do the thing that you were asking them to do without actually having to meet with them.
Interesting. Oh, you're a magician over there. So,
No.
and thank you for sharing the story of how you found my email. It's probably exactly like that, right?
That's exactly how I did it, actually. But yeah.
All right. One more thing here. SEO. I know you're very involved with SEO. What's the best way to get some quick wins with SEO, which for anybody that's not too familiar with the term is all about getting your website and your content more searchable on Google and all across the web so people can find you?
Sure. I think there's a lot of great influencers and thought leaders out there, and it doesn't take much to find some really great, simple guides that are kind of in the form of checklists and some basic things. And you can get really, really crazy with it. To give maybe a few of the sites that I would say are better than others, Backlinko is a great one. Neil Patel. And then if you're starting to try to test your kind of flair with some of the stuff that's a little more edgy, you can do Warrior Forum, Black Hat Worlds, Growth Hackers. I mean, there's so many different sites and there's so many people putting out great stuff. It's this really like highly evolved network of people. And by the way, the groups and on Facebook, if you search for either Growth Hackers or SEO growth on Facebook, I'm a member of 5 to 10 different groups. all of them 20,000, 30,000 people. There's so much good content that people are just giving away. So if you really want to learn this stuff, I mean, it's so easy to get a hold of these things. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, we're the era of free content, and it's continuing in that way. But SEO is getting more and more important, so appreciate you shouting out the links. So let's move to a segment on inspiration and creativity. So here, think about things that inspire you and keep your mind fresh, in terms of a few different areas. But first question here, what do you do to stay creative?
There's no like non-arrogant answer to that question.
Be arrogant, please. Let's do it.
Crank up the Snoop Dogg, smoke a lot of ganja. I mean,
no.
There's not like a magic bullet for it. I think it just really depends on what I'm focused in on. So I've always said that whenever you meet like really good engineers, the way that they tell you that they're the most creative is when they're put into something in the way of a narrow box, or they're given something that is really really strict in terms of the guidelines, where it can't be a certain size, can't be a certain length, has to be done in a certain time, so that you have to think based off of kind of these negative, I guess, influences. So if my influence is I have to do something within a very thin sliver of corporate innovation, and it has to be touching upon a subject that will get people riled up, all of a sudden I've narrowed down, instead of the whole world being at my disposal, I only got a couple of things that I can play with. So how do I make this weird, fun, edgy, interesting? And that's been kind of the game that I've had with Valuers. How can I kind of bounce between something that is super strict and corporate and boring and nobody wants to read, and something that's on the far end of that spectrum? Entrepreneurs, one of my favorite articles we put out was entrepreneurs that used to be drug dealers.
Which there's a lot of them.
You'd be surprised, actually, at least more than I thought there would be. And the list is not entirely like rappers and stuff. So
right.
It's one of those fun things. We only got 2 negative emails, by the way, from like cease and desist lawyers and that type of thing. But
yeah, well, I guess only 2 cease and desist that's a win.
2 out of 30 is not bad,
Right.
But it's fun to kind of put yourself into a situation where you have to kind of fight your way out of what is a very boring and uninteresting scenario. I think you can make almost anything interesting enough. One, if you care, obviously you have to be interested in the topic. But even if you're not, you have to take a different angle than everybody else is and see what else is out there. And there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Yeah. How about in terms of people, like as you've gone through your startup ventures and your different professional experiences, who are the people that have been most influential for you? Who do you look up to?
It's tough to say. I think I've had one or two really pivotal.
You just invented a word. I like it.
Pivotal. I like that. I've had two business partners that were outstanding. Brian Colligan and David Muir. Both of those guys kind of caught up with me when I was still in this fresh and eager phase, but didn't really have any of the skills to go with it. And they were at least willing to kind of give me that chance. And I think, whenever you're around somebody where you just kind of look over at some point and you're like, God, this guy, like, he gets it. Like, this is crazy. And
right.
There's some people that have a mind for certain areas and certain things. And I think it was a mixture of, one guy, Dave, I'm probably able to pull so much out of fairness and work ethic, how to treat others, motivation, and some of the nuances of disappointment and failure. And from Brian, it's thinking from another side of things. It's pausing before you speak. It's seeing what somebody else's interest or motivations for talking to you is prior to talking to them. So many different things that didn't really have phrases or words for them or any real psychology principles until you find out, like, oh, that's like he's talking exactly about the 10,000 hours from Malcolm Gladwell. He just didn't have a phrase for it, Like it's
right.
kind of this parallel thinking thing that's so wild. So I would say it's a mixture of that, and also working with people that are significantly less experienced and much younger than me. I think the youngest intern I have right now is 19, and it keeps me kind of rooted in reality, because it's like, fuck, was I that arrogant? Sorry for the language.
I didn't know which direction you were going to go with this, but that's one way. No, you're good. Yeah, we're explicit, by the way. So.
Oh, good. All right. Well, fucking A. Great. So
I knew that was coming.
I think it's always crazy to see some of these younger kids, because it's like, did I not know all of this, or did I just think that I knew all this, or was I less interested in almost everything else? I think you get so much out of seeing somebody else kind of working through what you assumed in, obviously now a mature state, is kind of like, well, I was always smart when I was like, no fucking chance. If I saw myself in person now at the age of 33, if I looked upon myself at the age of 20, I'd be like, get this guy out of my face. The biggest waste of space, you know, and I think it's humbling. It provides you a bit of perspective that I really can't afford to lose, because I'm nothing special even today. I don't think I will be anything super fancy tomorrow. Eventually, who knows? But I think when somebody is asking you questions in earnest and trying to genuinely learn from you, but also making really simple mistakes, you have to kind of take a step back and be like, hey, they're trying their best. Screw it. It's fine. You know, like, don't worry about it. When you have experiences that are counter to that, I think there's some learning there.
Yeah, there definitely is. But I think you've done all right over the years. Don't be too hard on yourself.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. How do you get your information or insight? I mean, do you like reading books? Do you listen to podcasts? What do you do sort of in that world?
Yeah, so I wish I had a lot more time for a lot of that stuff. I just don't, you know, and I have a relatively short commute in the mornings, which is part of the reason why I'm probably happier overall. But, you know, I'll listen to podcasts. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure in New York, how long is your commute?
Well, I work remote, so that's a tough question now. No. So I technically have zero commute, but I force myself to get my ass out of bed in the morning and work out. So
okay, good.
So I add to my commute intentionally, I guess.
That's almost like a negative commute. I like that.
Right.
So that's cool. But I don't have like the space and the time to do so much of the focusing in on the long. What I do have time to do is focus in very heavy detail on the projects that I want to learn from. So whether it's setting up something in the way of like an integration with 3 different tools, so like intercom, segment, and I don't know, there's 1,000 different tools. It doesn't matter. For the benefits of basically working my way from beginning to end to understand all of the parts of a project, that is worth staying late for me, because I'm not working for the money. I'm working to learn cool shit. Like I want to be the only guy that knows how to do that one thing, you know?
I appreciate you sharing some of the cool shit with us.
Yeah, of course. My granddad used to always say, you know, you never see a mechanic who's really good at his job out of work. And I fervently believe that that's absolutely true. Like if you're really good at what you do, you're never going to be scratching your head going, man, I wish somebody could pay me. It doesn't work that way, you know?
Right. Yeah. And it's proof just how powerful that curiosity and that eagerness to continue learning, and especially in these new sort of mysterious industries, can how well that can bode for your career.
Definitely.
All right. So let's move to a fan favorite section. This is called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Nice.
Yeah, it's basically like Snoop Dogg. But Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about a recent campaign or article, brand, anything we saw recently that stuck out to us, and talk about it for a little bit. So earlier, you had mentioned an article that was sort of in the world of SEO, but about skyscraping. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the skyscraper technique was something that Brian Dean of Backlinko is kind of known for. And the concept is metaphorical and very simple. Basically, in the old days of New York City, everybody wanted to have the tallest skyscraper, because when you were known as the tallest building in all New York, the center of the universe, people got excited about it. You know, they wanted to come either live in your building or own a business in there. So the concept was, if you couldn't build on top of what your building already had, add a giant fucking flagpole that's 60 feet above your building, and all of a sudden you have the tallest building in all of New York City. So you have to think of content like this. So if you're looking at the competitors of your industry, and there's a very simple tool called Hrefs that allows you to basically go down the left
Mhm.
side and click top content, you can see based on shares. And normally that's a pretty good indicator of obviously an article that's done well, social proof that a lot of people like or are engaged with it. You can see what best articles or the best pieces of content they've produced are. So the idea is if somebody writes an article that's called the 10 things I wish I knew before moving to Denmark, my article would be the 25 things you must know before moving to Denmark. And that's a really simple thing to do. And the idea is it's like beating somebody at their best game or taking their best star athlete out of the game early on. So you beat them at the keywords that they used to rank for, and you're a competitor. Therefore, you're drawing a significant portion of their traffic away from them if you do it right.
Wow, that's that's really fascinating to me because I think it could be viewed as controversial. Like a lot of people probably wouldn't like it because they spend so much time producing content, and then someone's just gonna, basically stomp on it and produce something better. But now, everything's public, and we have the tools to do that. So it just kind of creates more competition in the SEO world. So that's really, really interesting.
I agree. I think it's this world of meritocracy. The best will end up floating to the top. And
Right.
you try to create a better article, and you're not a great writer, or you're not adding value to the article, citing examples, not hitting the length that is required, anywhere from 3,000 upwards to 10,000 words. It's a lot of work. And hey, maybe you don't capitalize on that opportunity. There's a chance that you could fail miserably and spend a ton of time trying to beat somebody at their best game.
But I'm laughing as well about your comments about the tallest skyscraper and flagpoles because one, I just remember I used to be very intrigued by all these, world's tallest building and tallest building in every city. And so I'd look at their Wikipedia pages and all of them have such a big difference between their actual height, at the top of the building and the actual height when you consider the flagpole or antennas up on top. So that's kind of funny. New York, I mean, it feels like every few months they announce a new project for a super tall skyscraper that's going to be the tallest building here. Like that's still going on. It's still going on. So that's a really good metaphor for the SEO world as well.
I can't fathom why. I mean, I think I could come up with a few ideas in terms of psychology principles why that's a big deal, but I do find that hilarious as well. And just to kind of finish that thought out, if you do look up backlinko and skyscraper technique, they're releasing this 2.0 version. And I think it's really cool if you look into this, you can find the 2.0. The whole concept is user intent. What is the intention of the person coming to Google, searching for it, and then being able to find you? What do they expect to find? I think there's a lot there, and it's a relatively lengthy article, but worth the read.
Lengthy article, optimized for SEO in itself.
There you go.
So let's move to a little bit different segment here. This is a segment I call the unusual. So this is pet peeves, quirks, and weird talents. So first question, not that you wouldn't be able to guess this. What's your biggest pet peeve?
It's tough to answer. We just had like a moment, it's winter time, and whenever somebody like throttles kind of snot in their nose while they're just sitting there and it's just like this, like you could just use a tissue and then we don't have to all enjoy your voice, it's an office, so it's the noise carries. Right. But I can remember on numerous occasions, I'm not the only one bothered by that. So I don't have to be the one to like throw a tissue box across the room and be like, use a snot rag, it's. But that one is a bit of a pet peeve for me, especially during the wintertime. Everybody kind of has, cold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I was here just like walking in the street too. It's so common. How about quirks? Is there anything that you do, not that you have much free time, but that you do, it's just sort of a part of your personality or a trait that someone's called you out on before and said, that's a little odd. That's a little peculiar.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million different things. It depends on who you're asking, obviously. I don't know. I mean, so like, something that maybe was an experience more recently. So I was on a reality show called House Hunters International.
Oh, were you really? No way.
Yeah. Have you heard of it?
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great show. Yeah. And my parents huge fans of the show, but we actually, I've watched it with them before, the international edition itself. Yeah. That's
No
amazing.
way. Okay, cool.
How did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, I think I'm like somehow sworn to secrecy where I can't really reveal all of the goings on, but
Oh yeah.
there's some clever editing there. And I think I'm kind of known for sounding a bit arrogant. And I hate that that's part of my personality, but it is what it is. So I think they chose to edit a lot of that in a certain way to make me look a little more arrogant than I probably came off. But the producer was encouraging me to be exuberant, and I was also drunk for probably half the show with my buddy James.
Oh my God.
It's tons of fun. So during the decision scene, like my hair's all over the place, and we were hammered because we were drinking on one of the round bikes that multiple people pedal at once.
Yeah. Oh my God. Is there a link to that online that we can check out by any
I
chance?
can send it over.
Perfect. Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I would love for our listeners to be able to access that and to see the arrogant 19-year-old version of yourself. No.
Well, that was only a few years back. So yeah, no, I'm fine, man.
How did you get on the show? I mean, did you apply to them? Like what?
Yeah, it was a really simple thing. They reached out on, like every European city has like an expats of, and then whatever city, London, Berlin, Copenhagen. So they had put a link out on Copenhagen that was basically, are there any Americans that want to be on TV? That was it. So I'm like, I'll be your Huckleberry. Like, what's up, bro? And then it turned into something. He's like, yeah, I represent the show. I had never actually seen it until like the night before. So it's like not a big home and garden channel kind of guy. But the night before I'm like, wow, this is so not me. Great. So
wow. It's not a show that I traditionally would watch, or at least I didn't think it. But once my parents started watching, I kind of got into it because for anybody that likes travel, it's really, really interesting. And it's just kind of cool to see the different homes in different areas.
I agree.
Now with Airbnb being so big, they show stuff that's not too different from things that you'd be able to stay at for, way cheaper than you used to be able to.
Really good point with that as well. I was just going to say, it gives you a perspective of what it would be like to live in that city if you just kind of like got up and left, And I think that is cool. My favorite part, I was actually back in the States visiting during that show, and apparently people actually live tweet that show. So like, some of the, I had friends that were reading out the tweets. It's like, he looks like a fat, out of shape, younger Alec Baldwin. I'm like, amazing.
Oh my God.
Huge ego boost. So yeah, I don't read the comments of that stuff anymore, but man.
Yeah. You got a little glimpse of the social media haters that all these big time influencers experience. But wow, that's really cool. I didn't realize you were on the show. Shout out House Hunters International. And
there you go.
Besides being, extraordinarily humble, do you have any weird talents? Like anything that really doesn't have that much of a purpose or utility, but you can do it.
Yeah, not anymore. But I started learning hypnosis when I was 16.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I did that for like a high school talent show, and it was something that I didn't really start chasing girls and alcohol and all that stuff until 18-ish, and then not, crazy amounts, but it was one of those things that you just go over to a friend's house and hypnotize one or a few of the friends. And yeah, I mean, it was a ton of fun and something to kind of learn and go further down the rabbit hole. It was cool.
Wow. That's crazy. We actually had Rob and Kennedy from Response Suite on the show in a previous episode, and Rob is a hypnotist and Kennedy's a mind reader. So we kind of dove into a lot of that stuff, but it's a fascinating thing. I mean, it's something that seems kind of so distant, like, magical or something about it, but there are ways to learn it. And it's something that people experience more common than they realize, as you know. Do you still dabble in hypnotism anymore?
No, it's one of those things that you don't really find the audience for that unless you're on stage, and I'm not really trying to do that when I'm on stage presenting marketing things. But no, there's little nuanced details of the stuff that you learn in any hobby that you can apply to other things, whether it's in daily life with jobs or whatever. So there are fun things that I think came from that, and it was neat to suspend something of what I thought was impossible for something that there are real elements of this, and there's something there. It's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so we only have a little bit of time left. We are going to finish up here. We're going to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. Are you ready for it?
Sure.
All right, let's get wild. Please don't hypnotize me as we're going through this. What is your favorite place to travel in Europe?
I went to Bruges a few years back. Have you ever seen that movie with Colin Farrell?
I haven't, but when I studied in London, actually it was when my parents were visiting too, we took a weekend trip to Belgium, and Bruges was one of the places we hit.
Oh, beautiful.
But the movie, it's funny when you visit there, everybody asks that question. They say, oh, you heard of the, but what do you think of it?
I mean, it's described in the movie, I think, as like a medieval kind of fairy tale type look. I mean, it's gorgeous, and it's not a particularly rowdy town. It's very clean. Yeah, there's something special about that place that I can't put my finger on, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it really feels like it's from another time. And of course, amazing chocolate, right? Amazing fries, amazing beer, you name it, surrounded by windmills. So that's a great one. How about in terms of living in Copenhagen? You spoke a little bit about it before, but what's your favorite part of living there?
Yeah, I mean, I remember commuting to work from Arlington to either Reston back in the DC area, and my average commute was anywhere from an hour to sometimes 2 hours, depending on how bad traffic was. And I never got to see the type of stuff. Well, obviously, you see some weird shit, traveling to work in the States, but
right.
I mean, in terms of I'm sometimes traveling to work and just in awe of I never thought I'd be in this situation. I'm kind of living vicariously through myself at times because it's that nice. I didn't think that I would be in a city that's dead quiet in the morning time. You see the sun peeking over these giant building peaks, and it's clean. It's gorgeous. Everybody is seemingly in a good mood. It's like, what did I do right? This is unreal. So I get that commute every morning, and even though it's 34 degrees today, Fahrenheit, I'm still looking forward to the ride home. So, it's all good.
And how about in terms of food? If you had to have the same meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
General Tso's chicken.
That's a good one.
I know, right? They don't have it out here.
Really?
I'm debilitated. I'm like, nobody's got it. Nobody.
That's a bummer. I haven't seen it, but apparently there's I think it's like a Netflix documentary on General Tso and how it got its name and why it's so common. You've seen it?
Yeah. It's actually a really well-made documentary, and it explains kind of why that's an American phenomenon and hasn't really gone elsewhere. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm craving that exact thing right now. Okay, if you had to listen to the same song every single time you listen to music for the rest of your life, what song would it be?
Free Bird. No, I don't know.
Encore. Freebird's a classic. I wonder if you get sick of the length of the song, but we'll see.
Either that or like Banana Phone or something like that by the Raffi tape.
That might drive you a little batty.
Yeah, but I think you'll get used to that. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. All right. And this question is going to sound very dark, but I mean it in not a dark way. If you were trapped in a movie theater for 24 hours, obviously you're going to watch a movie because you have the giant screen, you're in the movie theater, but it can only be one movie. You could watch it over and over again for the 24 hours. What would that be?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure like many people, I go through phases, like there used to be a time that I would watch Forrest Gump every night for the better part of like a year before going to bed or fall asleep, and then of course you wake up just when the napalm hits because it's the loudest scene in the movie.
Right.
But yeah, that would have been it a few years back. I don't know.
Yeah.
Some movies kind of come and go. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind was also a movie that I used to be into, and I think it just depends. But yeah, right. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I think the dude answer is definitely like, yeah, Forrest Gump, man.
Well, technically, the dude answer would be The Big Lebowski, but
you beat me to that one. I did used to love that movie, and I went to one of the dude fests. Have you ever heard of these things where people basically dress up as the Big Lebowski and
oh my God,
watch the Big Lebowski in a theater? They do it, I know, in DC, and I've heard of it in New York as well. it kind of ruins the fun when people that obviously are a little too out there are like, oh, and they're basically speaking all the lines during the movie, and it's like, God damn it, this was the good part. You ruined it,
Right. Cool. So thank you so much, Taylor Ryan. That was pretty much all for this episode. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and stories and insight. I mean, I learned a ton. You blew my mind. I'm sure our listeners will learn a ton as well. So thank you, and keep up the amazing work in value. We're really excited to track and see how you guys progress even more over the years.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Max. I love the concept of putting out regular content, and I've listened to some of your stuff, man. I think it's actually really cool that you continue to kind of put the time, the energy, and the effort into something like this. I dig that. I don't have the ability at this point to do what you do, and I really admire it. It's very cool.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. And I'm sure you can carve out some time to do it. I'm sure anyone can do it. You might just need to not sleep for a week or something. but thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And before we sign off here, I want to make sure people know where to connect with you. Can you shout out your social media handles and also, or wherever the best place is to connect with you, and also where our listeners can find more information on Valuer?
Sure. So Valuer's address is Valuer, and it's spelled VALUER.ai. So not valuer.com, valuer.ai. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't think there's a lot of Taylor Ryans in Denmark. So if you look up Taylor Ryan, actually, no, that's not true. There's one other Taylor Ryan out here.
That's actually who I thought I was interviewing.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I'm an idiot. Of course that's a joke.
No, God.
So yeah, there's only two of us. So you have to guess which one is me, I guess.
All right. Probably the one eating General Tso's in the profile picture. But and last thing here, the stage is yours. Any final thoughts? Can you end with a quote or a line, anything you want to send us out on?
No, I sometimes finish out some of the presentations that I've given over the last couple of years with a very simple concept. And before we got on this call, basically an entire campaign had kind of been messed up. Not a big deal. Everything can be fixed, and nothing is a big enough mistake that it's the end of the world. But I've had a lot of really, really bad bosses, like really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things, if I were a lesser person, I might have hung up my hat and gone a different direction, or had tried something else because it was easier, and I would have let them ruin potentially a future path for myself. And I think what I try to stipulate and give to the people that work underneath me that are, as I mentioned, significantly younger, is that, today is very temporary. And eventually you will have your own interns, and you will end up leading another group of people in another company, and nobody stays anywhere anymore for more than 3 years. And that's a long time. Most millennials are switching every 8 months. So I always encourage people to be the boss that they wish they had. And I get stressed out like a mother. And I wish I had the ability to be 1000% the dude, the Big Lebowski, and like crazy chilled out. But I've never tripped up and raised my voice at the people I've worked with. I've never told them they're too dumb to work here. I've never insulted them, because
of course
that doesn't get you anywhere. That's an ego game. And I really want people to get something out of working with me, whether it's the understanding of an SEO skill, or understand that, hey, this is how you treat people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Treat the people that work with you and hustle around you like they mean something to you. And I think you'll end up getting, hopefully, stuff back tenfold. It just really depends on, how much temperament you have. But yeah, I think that's what I'd like to at least get out there, because man, it sucks working for somebody that's a total dick. And I'd hate to be that person.
Yeah, it really does. Well, thank you so much for the wisdom. The dude of Denmark, Taylor Ryan.
The podcast abides. Thank you so much, Taylor and the team at Valuer, for that amazing interview. And as always, big thanks to you wild listeners out there. Appreciate you tuning into another episode. As always, you can find the show notes for each and every episode at hippodirect.com. We post the blog there. We also post tons of helpful content, including the Hippo Digest, your weekly recap of creative marketing, which you could sign up and get straight to your inbox if you are a creative marketing fanatic. You can find even more helpful and amusing content on your favorite social media platform at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me personally at Max Brandstetter. And of course, if you are listening and you are not subscribed to this podcast already, please make sure to take that extra second to subscribe. While you're at it, if you don't mind leaving a 5-star review or 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, it goes a long, long way in the podcast world. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!